All right. I'm just a couple minutes early, so I'm going to give everybody a chance to get on here. So I thought I'd start with a couple of quick little things. If you're watching this live, you'll catch it after, or if you're watching the replay. I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware when you post in the Facebook group with photos for Photo Markup Friday, tag them with the hashtag Photo Markup Friday, just so I know. Sometimes with so many posts in there, it can be hard for me to follow. So sometimes I just search for that, and if you don't tag them, they might not show up. Also, if you asked me a question, posted photos or something like that, and I did not respond, especially if it's been a few days, go back and tag me again. It's not that I didn't, it's not that I ignored you. It's that I get literally every time I open my Facebook, I have like 30 notifications and I try to catch them all, but every now and again I miss one. So it's absolutely not intentional. Just tag me again. And if I still don't answer, tag me again. It's coming. Typically, I'm mostly on Facebook, on the Facebook group in the evenings. I am super busy. I know most of you know I run, the trimming school, I run a boarding stable, I run a lesson program, and I have a family and a life and all of that stuff. And I do a lot of training and whatnot on the side. So trying to keep up with it all is just sometimes hard to do. So I just wanted to make sure I covered that because I've been meaning to and forgetting. Let me just open that there. Okay. So tonight we are going to talk about common trimming mistakes or common things I see, which is really a hard subject because, I know most of you know I don't have like a specific trimming style. Like we always trim the toe to here or we always trim the heel to here. It's a really, it's a fluctuating trim based on the horse and the conformation and the situation and what's going on. So that being said, sometimes it would be okay to leave a heel where other times it wouldn't be. So really, I need a lot of context when I'm making these assumptions or decisions in looking at photos. And so that's going to play a part in what we talk about. But I guess really, I was trying to look for photos of like over trimmed hooves, but very few people actually over trim anything. Mostly people under trim. And so I thought it was kind of fun. I went through our Facebook group and tried to pull as many of the photos for the slideshow from there as possible. And don't take this, like, I don't mean it in an offensive way. Like, if someone trimmed a frog but didn't trim it enough, I'm using that photo to say, this is where most people usually get stuck. And, I'd like to trim it a little bit more, etc. And so I thought that'd be kind of cool. So if you recognize any of the photos, it's probably because I stole them from there. Um, but nothing is really crazy anyway. I mean, you guys are all on the right track. None of you are crazy aggressive trimmers. So I didn't have anything in there to pull to say like, whoa, slow down. So we'll just make our way through it. I've got a couple things to talk about, and then we'll finish up at the end with a weekly check-in if anybody has any questions. I do have a couple of sets of photos to mark up for Friday that were posted. I think they were posted like late afternoon Friday or something like that. So we'll get to those as well. So I'm just going to give it another couple of minutes before I get into the slideshow, and we'll go from there. I haven't been trimming. I've got a trimming course coming up this weekend, a private one, so that'll be good. Try to get all of the horses tackled, although it's a little challenging in the private courses when people are brand new to trimming. We don't usually get through, I don't know, the 20 horses or so that I have here, but we'll get through as much as we can. I'll see if I can I want to get a video of that little bump in front of the heel. You guys keep asking about that and how to take that down, because really, if I can just touch on that, I think you guys are overthinking that. Don't even think about it as like a little bump or a thing that needs addressing. Bring your angle from the heel further into the quarter and you will take care of it at the same time. It's really simple. So if I can film that this weekend during the course for you, I will. yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to touch on. So before I launch into the slideshow, really interesting. I had a girl messaging me today. She had the farrier out yesterday to trim her 6 horses, and 5 out of the 6 are dead lame today. And so she's been sending me photos. Nothing is particularly crazy in terms of the photos, but what I thought was interesting about it is she's saying, oh my gosh, they've all been over trimmed. And I'm looking at the photos. And this is what I mean about context. They don't really look over trimmed. They look okay. I mean, the walls are short and the bars are high and they're kind of uneven, but that's typical when people's horses are sore after a trim, they think they were over trimmed, which isn't always the case. It could be that those bars are really super high because they didn't get trimmed at all and all the wall length got taken down and now the bars are jamming inside. Or the heels are a little uneven, or the heels got trimmed, but the frog didn't get trimmed, and now there's too much pressure. So it's really a challenging one, and people tend to jump quickly to that bandwagon of over trimmed, but that's not necessarily what I saw in those photos. So I just thought it was kind of funny that she was messaging me that on the day we were going to do this slideshow, actually, as I was making the slideshow. So okay, I'm going to share my screen here and jump into it. From the beginning. Everybody can see that okay? Yes? Okay, Brianne gave me a thumbs up for moving forward. Thank you. All right. Whoops, did I go too fast? Hang on, no, we're right there. Okay, so a couple things I want to cover. Like really, I tried to sum up trimming in a nutshell, like to cover what I see, regularly. Toe length, too long or too short? I'll tell you right now, I can't remember the last time I saw a toe that was too short. Honestly, I can't remember. Even the gal who sent me photos today, those toes are not too short. So most of the time I see under trimming of the toe. I either see people not beveling steep enough or not beveling far enough back or not rasping enough off the top. That's a huge one. You all will know because I say that all the time. So we're going to go through toe length, heel height, too long or too short. And there's so many factors involved, like the same heel height on one horse might be too high or too short on another. So we'll go through that. Bar length, over or under trimming. And again, bar's another one. I honestly can't remember the last time I saw an over trimmed bar. It would have been way back. Oh geez, probably 6 or 7 years, really following the ABC trim method. There's a whole lot of bar trimming there. No. And I myself trimmed them too short. Hang on, I'm just gonna mute everybody here so I'm not getting background noise. Okay, so we'll go through bar length. Oh, and any of you, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, please just do so at any point in time. I just muted you all because there was some background noise, but if you have something to say, go for it. Let me see, frog height and health, over trimming, under trimming. Again, I can't stress enough that under trimming is a big deal too. It's not just the over trimming. Not trimming a frog and leaving it sitting up higher than the heels is a big deal. And we don't necessarily want to compromise our trim and not trim the heel to protect that overgrown frog. Everything has to be trimmed in balance. I try to keep it simple as much as possible. And I really play this mantra in my head all the time. Why are we trimming the hoof at all? Because we are simulating natural wear that our horses are not getting. That's it. It's simple. If they move 20 to 40 miles a day in the desert, they wouldn't need trimming at all. So I really try hard to not get hung up on all the crazy complex details and just play that in my head. Easier said than done, I know. Okay, so when we look at toe length, this is a nice optimal picture. We've got really nice connected hoof wall to the coffin bone. It's sitting at the same angle. We have a slightly elevated rear section of the coffin bone, that 3 to 5 degrees that we would like. A little bit of rounding at the toe and not a lot of flare. Okay, that's what it should look like. Here we have our nice connected hoof wall. This is showing some disconnect as things start to come forward. And I love these graphics, just as they show the hoof wall and the lamina pulling away. The dotted line shows where we should trim to. And then as we break over, how it will actually push that wall back together instead of leverage at the toe. I think that's very, very cool, and is exactly why we bevel. It's the one thing I see, like farriers in their typical, like, quote unquote pasture trim, is they don't usually put that bevel on. They leave the wall pointed at the toe. And when they do that, at this moment of breakover, that pointed toe is leveraging against the lamina and pulling apart. Whereas if you just simply put that 45-degree bevel on there, as they roll up onto that toe, it's actually going to be pushing together the lamina as opposed to pulling it apart. So that one tiny detail makes a huge difference in the overall health of the hoof. Okay, so these are all pictures that I pulled from the group, which I thought was kind of fun, just to talk about some of the things I see. Sandy posted this one today, and I know that I've been working with her for a while. And so you can see as she was rasping her heels, she rasped the toe at the sole here. She didn't mean to, but that rasp was just floating down over the sole. I see that all the time. And I can't stress enough how important it is to elevate that rasp up, not only because you can't get a proper heel angle if you do that, but because you don't want to thin the sole at the toe. Now she's okay in this photo. You can see how much exfoliating sole and bar is loose on this thing right in here. Like all of this, if it weren't so dry, it would probably come out. So she has not over thinned this sole by any stretch, but I really like to tilt my rasp up and avoid hitting that sole. That's one common thing I see all the time. The other is this, what I call dubbing the toe. So we've come in vertically and tried to rasp that flare back, but you've left this big ridge up here. And so this isn't necessarily super detrimental, assuming you're going to come back and trim this horse again in the next couple of weeks. If you leave this horse 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that, this kind of dubbing is going to grow down, and then the tip is going to be leveraging again. It's a little hard to tell from this photo, but I don't really see a bevel underneath here. It's almost like the bevel got done vertically as opposed to 45, and it's not quite back far enough. And then we've got this weird little ridge up here. So what I would say is, instead of coming down vertically, come down following, the new growth, and bring the whole thing back together. Kind of like we've done here in this bottom photo. But what I wanted to comment on this is I do see a little bevel under here, probably not quite as steep as I would like it, but they've kind of left this sharp edge. I would have liked to have seen you come down a little bit steeper with your rasp to kind of address the whole angle of the foot. And so this is something we haven't talked a whole ton about, but I say it in my markups all the time, and that's rasp the toe a little more vertically to steepen the whole angle of the hoof wall. And when I say that, I understand that you're not really changing the angle of the coffin bone when you do that. You're just rasping the external hoof wall. But as you rasp that steeper, it reduces the leverage so that the entire hoof can come in more connected. So know in your head, like, I'm not thinking you're just magically fixing all these angles and doing that, but you're bringing that wall back to a point where there's going to be reduced leverage as your trim grows out. And so that's what hang on. That's what I see on this foot here. This needs to come in a little bit steeper because I think it's detached right from the top up. It's a little bit more connected in this 1/2 inch, and then it kind of shoots forward. So I would like to see that just come back and be a little more rounded here. And then this one I see all the time. Usually people who are really timid in their trimming, which is, again, not a bad thing, but under trimming this particular hoof or this toe, is a huge liability as well, because you've got connected growth coming in here at a steeper angle, and then the whole thing is shooting forward. So all of this leverage, even though you've beveled, is going to completely undermine this new growth, and you're never going to grow this out. This is probably the number one thing that I see every single day, is someone trying really hard to get in there and trim, but not knowing how far they can bring that toe back and leaving all this excess leverage. And this, if you only did that every, say, 2 weeks, that would be okay. But most people don't trim every 2 weeks. If you're going to leave this for 4 weeks or longer, we've got to be more aggressive in reducing that leverage. And this is a good starting point. Like, I say it to all the students that come, I would so much rather they're not aggressive enough than carve everything off too short and then we have to worry about it. So this is a good starting point that I can then give you more feedback and shape that advice so that you can keep going. Because whatever, this little bit of top rasping here, you know, I'm not, it's not super effective. All it's done is kind of taken that dirt layer off. So I would really like to see this come back quite a lot more to really steepen the angle of that hoof. And so I threw this picture collage in here. This is my horse Dixie when she was here for rehab of this hoof crack. And so this is what she looked like when she came. This is all in one trim. I thought it was interesting for a couple reasons. I wanted to show you, one, from the side, how much leverage I had to take off. But I also thought this redness that you see at the toe would be something we should talk about. Because I think it was Sandy's photo today had that bruise and she said, oh my gosh, I saw that and I stopped. So when I see red like this, I don't stop, like unless I was going to stop anyway. But a bruise like this happened higher up. So like, you know, if we look at the connection, I don't know, it's to about here, maybe to here even, everything below here has already been ripped apart. As it's ripped apart at the very top, at the lamellar connection, it bleeds into the tubules. And then the tubules have to grow down. And as those tubules grow down, the blood that was in there as it bruised and ripped away stays there and stays bright red until it grows out the bottom of the foot, where, like this bottom picture here, within a day this red blood will oxidize and be brown or black and you won't even see it anymore. So anytime you see bruising like this, it does not mean like you're getting too close to the sensitive tissue, or like it also doesn't usually mean the horse bruised its foot yesterday. Usually it's weeks ago and it's just growing down. It just depends where the bruise is. Like the sole is thinner, right? Like, you know, 3/8 of an inch thick, sometimes a little bit more. And so it takes significantly less time for a sole to grow 3/8 of an inch than it does for an entire 3-inch hoof wall to grow from the coronary band down. So depending on where the bruise is relative to the growth, kind of will tell you when it happened. But I can assure you, because I have done it, I have trimmed horses, not so much at the toe. I've never trimmed a toe till it bled, but I have trimmed bar to the point that it was bleeding, way back when I was following a different trim style. And I can assure you, you will go from whiter black colored hoof to whiter black colored hoof to gushing blood. There is no pink layer like, oh my gosh, if you take one more swipe, it's going to bleed. It doesn't work like that, because the blood will actually wick through the tubules before you've even gotten too thin that, you know, you would see that you think it's going to bleed. So I no longer do that. That was, that's something that ABC Trimming talks about, that Cheryl Henderson kind of does. And I'm not actually sure it's wrong all the time. I just find that the whole 2x4 on the grass analogy with the bar, as we shave a little off, let it push up, shave a little off, I find that to be far more effective for me. I can guarantee you, if I could over trim a horse's foot, like say a really neglected overgrown hoof, and over trim it and have the horse be sore for a week for the greater good of then rehabilitating that and not having to do it anymore, I would do that every time. I would sacrifice that week. The problem is it doesn't work like that. Once you over trim something and make the horse sore, it changes the way they move and articulate their limbs. Therefore, it distorts all the hoof growth moving forward. So it's not super effective. And that's kind of why I didn't really stick with that. When we trim the bar, you know, that deep, it causes soreness, and then we have to boot and pad and get our way through that. So it's just not kind of where I'm at now. But I've been there. So anyway, I just thought this would be cool to talk about. And incidentally, we grew this entire crack out of Dixie's hoof. It's no longer there. So that was really cool.
I have a question. It's Brianne.
Yeah.
Around this, because that would scare me if I saw that, but it makes sense that the blood looks fresh, even though it's not, because it hasn't hit the air, so it hasn't oxidized. That was actually like a very key piece to hear. So for example, the one that was on today that I think you had the example, who was that, Sandy?
Yes.
So that seemed like such an aggressive mark for the toe beveling, but I see on this one, it looks like it's pretty aggressive. So I guess in my mind, I have a really hard time picturing, because I know that there's lamina in there beveling so far back, and that's like into the toe. I don't know why my brain can't understand that. I feel like I'm gonna bevel into a hole, or like bevel into opening something up that I shouldn't expose. Like I can look at a picture and go, okay, I think it's fine. So I don't know what my question is. I guess I just have a hard time understanding.
The part that you're wrapping your head around is most of these hooves that we're talking about in that state have some version of a lamellar wedge in between the hoof wall and the coffin bone. Like,
Okay.
like there's disconnect. Like Sandy's horse Jack here is foundered. And so a lot of what we see in this toe region is lamellar wedge. And so it is a pretty aggressive bevel, but it's not really even back as far as it could be. And it's not so much a hole. Like if we think back to here, this yellow, what she's essentially done is created this. She's created a parallel hoof wall to the coffin bone. That does not mean the wall inside is reconnected, but it means we're growing that wedge out. And it's in this wedge, like right in here where this is unzippering, that's where it's bleeding. And the blood's getting trapped there and formed into that yellow lamellar wedge and then growing down with it.
Okay. Yes, that does make sense. I think then when I sent you, or I posted the pictures of my friend's horse and it was the back feet. I'm trying to find it
Yes.
on the post. And that also had a pretty aggressive toe mark where I think it would be beveling into the toe,
Yep.
or into the sole.
Yes.
And I know that it's hard because that picture, I didn't get great pictures, but and her toe does look long, but that worried me too because I thought, so do you think that horse also probably has a little bit of a separation that's creating a wedge down there because her toes are so long?
Definitely.
Okay.
Her toes are crazy long. Like,
Yeah, they really are.
you know, it's really hard to tell you exactly how much. Like, and I know
Yeah.
you didn't take those pictures, but for me to be more specific, we need the oblique, we need the side, you know, we need all those pictures. But I can tell just from the shape that toe is ridiculously long. And you have to
Yeah.
remember, like the sole grows from the bottom of the coffin bone, and its purpose is to protect the bottom of the coffin bone from the ground. But that sole is sealed inside of that hoof wall via the golden line or the white line, whatever you want to call it. And I think of that white line as the silicone that bonds the sole to the hoof wall, period. That's what it is. Like it's like this little silicone rim that it's all connected. So if we allow the toe to grow super long and stretch forward, that silicone connection is going to suck the sole forward with it.
Mm.
That doesn't mean,
Mhm.
right? Like that doesn't mean it's moving the coffin bone, but it's stretching the sole. And so that in itself creates a thin sole because there's only so many sole tubules to cover the bottom. And if a whole bunch get pulled forward, they're going to have to compress and become thinner in order to make up that distance. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yes.
And so, yeah, lots of people freak out when I'm like, oh yeah, bevel it right back into the sole. But that's because the sole is being pulled forward. And until you cut that connection and stop pulling it forward, it's not going to be able to grow down and thicken. And we have to remember we have that lamellar wedge in there, which is acting kind of as our prosthetic hoof wall when we trim the hoof wall off. So like most of those, like that, your friend's horse, that would be a really aggressive trim, kind of like Dixie, the previous photo. It would be something like that, trimming way, way back in order to correct that. And I will say, typically, horses are not sore from trimming a toe like that. Like usually, like there's lots of things I will do in stages, and I will sometimes tell people take that toe back in stages, not because you need to for the horse, I mean, but usually for the people because the people are nervous to do it. So
Yeah.
with the things like trimming a ton of bar, trimming lots of heel, or taking all the hoof wall from the quarters down, those are things that make horses sore. Steeply beveling the toe and rasping from the top very rarely make horses sore unless you
Mm.
go too far, because all you're doing is removing excess leverage, and that lamellar wedge is padding the whole process.
Okay. You said taking a lot of bar can make them sore though?
Yes.
Okay. And is that just because you're removing the thing that was sort of giving them bruising? And then like if it's overlaid, or how can it make them sore?
Not really. Like removing the thing that's causing the bruising is good, but oftentimes when that bar overlays the sole, it kind of embeds itself in the sole and creates
Mm.
a really thin sole underneath. And
Okay.
so even though it sounds completely contradicting. Sometimes I leave the bar a little bit high to pad the thin sole that's underneath the bar because of the high bar. So I will trim off some, but not all of it, because I know the sole underneath is extremely weak and won't be able to hit the ground yet. But I've trimmed enough that it will start to push it up, so that in a trim or two, I can take the rest and the sole will be thick enough.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
But that's a crazy concept, right? To like think
Yeah.
that we're leaving a little bit of the liability for protection. It's a bit hard to wrap your head around. Okay, so Dixie, yeah, this was my most aggressive trim on her. That was the first one. You know what's sad is this horse, this exact shoe job and glue job, they just stuck a chunk of vet tech adhere, assuming that would hold that crack shut. This was being done by the instructors at the farrier school at Olds College. The owner of this horse, I didn't own her at the time, she had been trailering her from somewhere else, like I think 3 or 4 hours each way to have this application done. They were charging her some ridiculous thing like $400 to do this. And she'd been doing it for 7 months with, you can see here, 0 progress. That just kills me. Within the first 2 trims, this crack started growing out and now it's entirely gone. You can follow her on my blog. She has a whole blog and that documents growing this crack out if you want to see it. But, speaking of the problems I see, the excessively long toe is the biggest problem I see. And I think if we could just change all farriers in terms of how long they leave the toe, we would solve 80% of all the hoof problems we see, because almost all of them are caused by long toes, like underrun heels, overlaid bars, white line disease, flares, cracks, chipping. It's almost all caused by too long of toe. So that's absolutely the worst thing I see. Okay, when we talk about heel height obviously affects the pastern angle. It can make or break NPA, which is negative palmar or plantar angles. Palmar for the front feet, plantar for the rear feet, which is way more complicated than it needs to be. So I just call it NPA. The angle of the heel directly impacts the coffin bone. And that's what I mean when I talk about rasping the heels to the plane of the bottom of the coffin bone or the bottom of that collateral groove depth. That's to make the coffin bone ground parallel. And again, air quotes, not actually ground parallel, but 3 to 5 degrees at rest, so that at peak impact, it's ground parallel, which I get is complex. Bring the heel angle brings the heel back as well as bringing it down. But that bringing the heel surface back is really important in terms of posture and conformation of the horse. Heel height can provide artificial concavity. That is a big one. So quite often, if I pick up a hoof and it's very, very flat through the sole, I will leave the heels high to provide artificial lift. It's not really concavity, but it's lift so that that sole is not pressed right on the ground. That's a lesson. I have to thank a horse named Jewel, beautiful little reining quarter horse that boarded here and then I owned and then I sold. I made that poor horse suffer for 2 years with solar inflammation. She was very badly foundered and I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out how to fix it. And I kept trimming her heels and her toe and everything. And that poor horse was sore after every trim. I'm not even kidding you, for like 2 years, until I finally realized it was solar inflammation causing her to be sore. I thought it was trimming the toe. I thought it was trimming the bar. I thought it was the heel. I couldn't figure it out. When I started leaving her heel high, or alternatively, this was also before the new composite shoes. If I'd had that horse now, so much has changed in my head. But back then we didn't have that. We had boots and pads, and I would cut the pads like a donut shape, which is pretty much the shape of the composite shoe, and put it in the boot to relieve the solar inflammation. That's finally how I made this connection, was those donut shaped pads in the boots to take some of the pressure off of her sole because she was super flat footed. That's when I started realizing we need to leave the heel high, even though, and back then it was, you have to trim the heel down so the digital cushion gets stimulation. That's the train I was on. And that's true. But in these cases, now I sacrifice the stimulation to the digital cushion to provide comfort to the bottom of the sole while we grow in a connected hoof wall. So we can finally have natural concavity that I can then bring the heel down and strengthen the digital cushion. For me, that was part of my journey about learning in what order I had to rehabilitate those things, because I couldn't do it all at once. Back then I thought I could. I thought I could just trim it all, and that poor horse suffered. But she taught me so much that I got to thank her for that. That's what you're doing, you think?
I think so, right? With my horse, I think we've left a little bit of heel because her frog is not great and her digital cushion we don't think is super developed. So it's helpful to hear that, because I think that's what we've talked about, is leaving a little bit more heel than I think we would want on a perfect trim, for those reasons.
Yeah, and that's a different reason than the solar inflammation. That is to protect inflammation from the frog or digital cushion. But yeah, same thing. And again, back then me would have been like, that's okay, she'll tough it out and be fine. And I have since learned that when you do that and you make them tough it out, they change the way they move and change their posture. And then they end up with back pain and tight pelvis and all these other things that it's just not worth it, because you end up with this cascade or ripple effect of all of these compensations. But, I had to start somewhere and work my way through that journey. My goal is to now share that and hope that all of you don't have to work your way through that journey on your poor horses. I made enough suffer. Okay, heels to provide artificial concavity and support a weak frog or digital cushion, which is what Brianne's doing. So we'll go through these. Heel affecting pastern angle, obviously. But I wanted to state that the trim should dictate the pastern angle. It's not really the other way around. And what that means is I don't look at a horse with a steep pastern and go, oh, we better leave a really high heel and steepen off that toe to match. Instead, I look at the hoof and assess what the hoof needs in relation to the current pastern angle. And so like, if I was looking at this middle B hoof here, I would think like, is there any way we could lower this heel to help realign this? Or, this one here in C, it would be like, is there any way we can take some length off this toe to help balance this out? It's kind of, for me, I think about the hoof first and the pastern angle second. But before I trim the hoof, I'm thinking about the pastern angle so that I can kind of make an informed decision for both all at once, which is a little bit challenging. But I don't necessarily, I don't put a lot of stock in the pastern angle, like a little bit for sure, when it comes to the biomechanics of the horse and stress in the hips and shoulders and things like that. But I'm more concerned about creating a healthy hoof, which will allow the pastern angle to come in alignment. But this is important when we're talking about horses that have soft tissue injuries. I know this is a little blurry. You can't really see the text because I blew it up so big. But when we have a healthy hoof, those tendons work, as a pulley system. When one pulls, the other gives, and vice versa. When we have this raised hoof angle, we have strain along the front of the foot because this extensor tendon is overstrained. And when we have the low underrun feet, we have the excess strain on the back of the leg, on both the suspensories and the deep digital flexor tendon. And the suspensories are impacted here as well to a lesser degree. And so if I have a horse with a soft tissue injury, I might compromise my trim and my pastern angle to reduce the pressure on that injury while it heals, which is also really challenging. And typically you have a vet involved helping you with this. But for instance, we have that one horse that's boarded here that has bilateral contracted tendons and club feet. And so his feet are almost vertical. He is like an extremely exaggerated version of hoof B or this raised hoof angle. His foot is almost vertical. And so he has all kinds of scar tissue on the tendons of his feet. Of his leg, and like you can feel it, it's hard calcifications where it's adhered to the bone. And so for him, we compromise the trim a little bit and leave that heel high to try to reduce some of that pressure because it's never going to get better. That's like a very serious example of that. you know, I would think talking about, say, a horse that just strained something, we could leave the heel a little bit high. Actually, Sandy's horse, Vala, did that. She had a bowed tendon, and we left the heel a little bit high to not provide too much tension on the deep digital flexor tendon until that healed. And then we very carefully, gradually brought that heel back down. And when I say we left it a little bit high, like at the maximum point of leaving it high, that was 1/4 of an inch. It was not leaving it like 2 inches high. It was 1/4 of an inch, which is a big deal when you're talking about tendons and ligaments because they don't have stretch to them. Okay, so NPA, I just wanted to touch on, and that's this broken back hoof pastern axis, where the front of the coffin bone is actually elevated higher than the rear of the coffin bone. And this is an extreme case because this is at rest. At peak impact, it's going to be even more exaggerated. This is going to cause huge inflammation higher up the leg. And this is something I see all the time, and something that, you know, depending on the condition for the horse, I may or may not address with wedges. It depends how severe it is. It depends if the body is compensating and sore. In this case, this was really severe. I would definitely consider wedging it. If this horse, well, there's no way that horse would be comfortable with that kind of angle. If the horse is comfortable and not causing body compensations, usually we can address it barefoot. Like I can look here and know that we could round this toe and lose, I don't have a point for reference here, but we could probably shave off 1/4 of an inch of height to this toe, which would rebalance this and probably create a 0-degree angle, which is still going to be negative on peak impact, but better than it is. So I see this ignored a lot in the barefoot circles. Farriers are real quick to wedge this stuff, but you know, barefoot being what it is, everybody wants to leave horses barefoot as often as possible, and this gets ignored a lot. And it's so prevalent right now. So, you know, for me, it's a depends situation, but even if we're not going to wedge it, we still need to address it by correcting the trim overall.
Sorry, I have another question. You're going to regret inviting me.
It's okay.
So wedging, I'm not doing shoes, so there might be other folks in the group who are, but just trying to understand, I've seen some folks at my barn who are dealing with what I think would probably be NPA. They'd have like crushed heels and stuff, but they've been in shoes for years, horses for shoes forever, but they have whatever ring bone or something that's causing pain. And it seems like farriers wedge them pretty quickly to kind of elevate, and it fixes the angles. This guy wedged a horse at my barn, and his pastern angle looks a lot better, but he wedged him 5 degrees, and then the horse came up lame. So I guess if instead of wedging, would that horse have potentially had an option to just pull some shoes and maybe try to let the heel grow? Because now I feel like that heel isn't going to grow, right? And 5-degree change is a pretty huge change to tilt that foot up on its toe. So I guess my question would be, would you potentially do that to let the heel grow, pull the shoes to try to do that as another option? And then now that he is wedged to 5 degrees, is there anything that they can do to help?
Well, yeah. So wedging to me is a Band-Aid solution. Like you put that 5-degree wedge on, and for those that are not familiar, 5 degrees is about 1/2 an inch of lift, but maybe a little bit less. So, you know, yeah, you've instantly made the whole thing look pretty, but now you've overextended the extensor tendon in order to do that. It's not meant to be flexed like that. You know, it's like us wearing high heels. I mean, I'm only 5'2". If I put on a 4-inch heel, I look average height, but my whole body has to compensate to wear that. It's the same thing with a horse. The whole limb has to compensate with that wedge. Like, you know, if I'm even, I don't know if you guys can see me, if I'm just sitting here and I think about wedging, if my front feet were hooves, like I have to adjust my shoulders to compensate how my arms attach to my body. And horses are in the same boat. Like that scapular angle has to adjust to accommodate that wedge on a front foot, and on a hind foot, the pelvis, because you have a ball and socket, can't just reposition. The whole pelvis has to reposition. And now maybe to a more normal standpoint where it should be, but that's not muscularly where the horse is used to carrying it. So you've made a huge change down below that cascades all the way up to the whole musculature of the horse. So one, I rarely use 5-degree wedges. Usually I start with 2.5. if I'm going to wedge. And you can wedge under a composite shoe, under a metal shoe, or you can wedge by putting thick padding in the back of a boot. It doesn't have to be a shoe. The reasons I wedge is usually because the horse is suffering acute body injuries because of the low angle. So if that horse is compensating in some way that he's got lumbar pain, pelvic pain, or puffy tendons or something, then yes, I would agree with wedging him. But the wedging is a Band-Aid, and we have to look at it as a way to relieve those symptoms while still addressing the root cause, with which what caused that super low angle in the first place, so that while we are using the shoe, we can grow the proper hoof so we can remove the wedge and take that off. So just pulling the shoes and going barefoot and allowing the heel to grow, maybe. It depends on the body and how comfortable the horse is and all those other factors. If he's good, say, and he would be just fine, then yeah, you could go barefoot, put a correct trim on. Typically, we have those long underrun toes, or sorry, underrun heels, because the toe is too long. That's usually how we address it. And I didn't put a picture in here, I should have, when I was talking about long toes. Like the number one reason toes are long is because farriers like to butt the shoe up to the edge of the toe at the front. And when you do that, you know, you don't have that breakover coming back. You're rolling off the tip of the toe. And so everything is extended. I have seen in my entire career, like maybe 2 farriers who actually can bring a toe back far enough and still nail on a metal shoe and get effective breakover. It's very, very rare, because there's not enough understanding of that internal anatomy, I think, which is also the same with composite shoes. I'm a member of the composite shoe group on Facebook. I can't even scroll through that page because all I see is the shoe set too far forward on the hoof. And I just want to bang my head against the wall, because I'm like, all of you are trying to do the right thing and you are moving in the right direction, but you are missing a massive critical piece of the puzzle, the breakover. That needs to come back. And if you can't get the shoe back, then grind it into the shoe. Like, even the shoes, I don't know what they're called. They've got these metal shoes come out and they have a breakover ground into them, which I think is hilarious, because then everyone sets them so far forward and thinks because they have this like optimal breakover, it's fine. And I'm like, it's the same actually, but it's kind of funny to me. I find it very ironic. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, other than,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes we wedge, sometimes we don't, but ultimately you need to address why you're wedging. You need to shorten the toe, grow in a healthy hoof, grow that heel more vertical, all of those pieces that contributed to the underrun foot. But, you know, we like instant fixes, myself included. Like, if I could just wedge up every horse and they'd be fine and it was easy, that's great. But it's not easy, because like that horse, they come up with other mystery lamenesses that you have to figure out what did you overstrain or move or torque that created that now? And is that better than the other one? Or was the previous situation better? So it becomes one of those. Okay, I wanted to touch a little bit on the heel angle and how or why that's important. So if we look at this upper photo here, this is what a heel should look like. When I'm talking about rasping this heel to match the bottom of the collateral groove angle, and your heel is the highest point, which dips down into your quarter. Both of these are actually really nice examples of that. And this is a beautiful example of a nice 45 bevel. But this heel comes down into the quarter and around. This is a great picture showing us this high spot right in front of the surface of the heel. And this is probably not fair to whoever's photo this is. I'm pretty sure this is pre-trim and not post-trim, but I just snagged it because it had this perfect angle. So I'm sure they probably corrected this. But I want to make sure that right back here at my heel is the highest surface of my heel, that it then ramps forward and down, not up and then down like this one. Like the heel kind of comes down to here, then comes up through here and then ramps down. And this is those little bumps. I think, I can't remember, somebody posted a photo and Brianne, you commented on it asking how to get those little bumps down. And it's not about aiming for those bumps. It's about getting your rasp in here at this angle and like rasping the heel and then coming forward into the front of the quarter with the same angle as if it were your heel surface before you turn your rasp and come down into the quarter. It's just that when you're rasping that rear heel angle, you're only aiming at the heel. you're not aiming far enough forward to the front of the heel. And that's why those bumps are created. It's actually that simple. I said at the beginning of the video, I think before you joined, I have a trimming course this weekend and I'm going to try to film that because I think everybody's overcomplicating it and it's not that challenging. If you just rasp that angle and then come forward a bit before you think you're done the heel and go into the quarter, you won't have those anymore. So getting that angle to bring that heel surface back, but to also have that heel be the highest point and ramp down into your quarter. The other thing I would say about this particular hoof, just while we're here, is I would want to come in and lower this frog a little bit, because right now it's sitting up equal to or maybe slightly high right here to the heel. And if I'm going to bring these heels down, I definitely don't want to leave this frog sticking up. Okay, so talk about high heels. This is ridiculous. This is my friend Sheila's foundered mini, and I had been trimming this horse for a couple of years. It had wonderful feet, and then she moved a couple of hours away and had hired a local farrier. And in those, I don't know if it was about a year or 9 months that this farrier was trimming this horse, they never once trimmed the heels. And she's a mini, so, you know, I don't know what this is. It's about a 3-inch heel, but you can see how when you leave the heel ridiculously long like this, it gives you the illusion that the hoof wall is not that disconnected. I mean, you can still see it's disconnected about halfway down, but it's much worse than this. When we come in and we trim this heel off and then this horse puts its foot down, this foot will be coming almost straight out the coronary band. And I had to be pretty severely aggressive on the toe. She actually hauled her here, or she hauled her to the vet and got x-rays and then hauled her here. And I gave her a really good trim before sending her back and found her a student of mine to take over to try to get this little thing back on track. But I just wanted to kind of talk about the rearmost surface of this heel right in this before picture, or in this picture, is down here. And if we could draw a straight line up from that rearmost surface of the heel, it should run midway down the cannon bone. This one is probably going to come up in front of the cannon bone from down here. But if we trim this heel back to where it's supposed to be, it will come up through the midpoint of the cannon bone. And that's going to help this horse posturally get her legs underneath her where they're supposed to be. And so that's the important part of bringing that heel back to the appropriate place, as well as in this case down, because that's ridiculously high. Okay, this was a fantastic example of a super flat-footed horse that requires extra heel height for artificial concavity. This sole is so very flat. If we came in, and this is what I did to that poor quarter horse for all those years, was cut off these heels and drop this horse right down on that sole and the frog and all of that. And then he's going to get solar inflammation and be sore. That is probably the #1 reason why I see horses that are lame after trims, because the heels are over trimmed when they are flat-footed. It would be different if this horse had a lot of natural concavity to the bottom of his foot, then we could actually trim this heel down. But I can see from the front, we're still working on growing out this super flared hoof wall and getting this well-connected growth all the way down. What's going to happen is this well-connected growth is going to come all the way down. When it gets to about here where the snow is, it's going to start to lift the coffin bone up within the hoof capsule, and we're going to get some more concavity in here. And I mean, this being in snow, I think I pulled this from a while ago. It's probably looking better by now, but I just thought this was a really good example of leaving that heel for artificial concavity. The other reason we will leave a heel high is for a super sad little frog like this. If we came in and we trimmed these heels down and we knocked this horse down on this frog, he will be dead lame. And I see barefoot trimmers, I was one included. Remember back in my whole strengthen the digital cushion day, I would totally have knocked those heels off to where I think they should be eventually and made that horse tough it out with a sore frog. I no longer will do that. I would not trim those heels. I would let them grow longer until we treated that frog so it wasn't so painful and sore that we could effectively get those heels back down to where we need to be over time. This guy also has a ridiculously long toe. This was not my photo. It was just one I stole online, but that toe needs to be addressed too. It's way too long. but I just thought that was a great example. And they did a really good job. If you look at this nasty crack through the heel bulbs, completely healed in, that's really nice. But that's one reason we'll leave those heels high. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is high-low, meaning that this heel is quite a lot lower than this heel. Let me see here. Barefoot trimmer telling everyone to drop horses to their frog, and sometimes the trimmer aggressive. Yeah, it's not good for all horses. And I was there. Like, I actually think I want to write a book, The Evolution of the Barefoot Trimmer, because we all go through that. And so I try hard not to knock those people because I was that person. But we do. We go through that, like, sculpt and trim every horse or every foot the same to the perfect parameters. I don't care if the horse is lame. Then we start getting fired because everybody's horses are lame, and that doesn't work. And then we move to, okay, what sacrifices can we make to keep the horse sound? Maybe a little bit of heel or a little bit of this or that. And then eventually we move through the when it's appropriate and when it's not. And that's kind of my mission in everything I do, is to speed that journey up for as many barefoot trimmers or people trimming their own horses as I can, because I don't want them getting stuck in that point for too long. Like me, making that poor quarter horse suffer for 2 years. If someone could have just knocked me upside the head and taught me that lesson sooner. But in all the reading and all the education I ever did, I never found that piece of information. I had to learn it the hard way. Hopefully, I think there's more out there now. It's become so much more mainstream that the information is getting out there. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, I see barefoot trimmers or farriers or pages on Facebook all the time that I don't agree with. And, you know, I get how hard it is to put advice out there. Like, for me to just make a video and say, you should do this, I'm going to be met with a ton of people who agree and some who are indifferent and some who disagree, because, you know, everybody has their own opinion and it depends on the horse and the circumstance and all that. So I don't know. All I can say is I think that is part of the journey that everybody has to go through. I just hope they go through it quickly and come out on the other side. Okay, so when we're talking about high-low, I see a lot of, well, me again, I'm just going to go back because I know me. I went through a phase of, I didn't address high-low. I addressed each hoof as an individual hoof and moved on. And that worked fairly well for me, actually. It's not necessarily the wrong way to do it. But now that I've learned so much more about the biomechanics and movement of the horse, I see high-low as a much greater issue, more to do with biomechanics and riding and balance and symmetry. And it's not really about the feet. Like, it is, but it creates cascade effects higher up. Like, the shoulder on the foot that's high is going to have a lot more restrictions, and it's going to move differently and articulate differently than the shoulder on the low foot. And if the shoulders are uneven and the horse is weighting itself differently up there, they're going to be weighting themselves differently in the back. And so I now approach high-low as a more whole horse problem, and I try to find balance there quickly so that posturally the horse is more even. And that took me also a long time to learn, and a lot more understanding of the biomechanics and movement and riding. And so I often wonder about, like, there's a lot of farriers who don't ride and like haven't ridden and don't plan to ride. And I'm curious how they figure that part out when they don't have that experience. That, to me, I find really intriguing, because it wasn't until I really pushed my riding to a different level beyond just trail riding, when I really started to getting into dressage and feeling the restrictions in the movement of my horse with high-low, that I started to open up to this and really started to create the changes that allowed her body to change so that I could have that symmetry when riding, which has been really cool. So, I know a lot of barefoot trimmers don't really address it, and I think a lot of traditional farriers try. But again, it's very individual based on the horse, whether or not we wedge up the low one to match, or we trim the high one to match the low one, or a combination of both. And there is a huge component of imbalanced muscle development that we also have to rehabilitate, that I don't think a lot of people are really on that train just yet, but I hope it's coming. Okay, this one was an example of leaving the heel a little bit high to protect a weak little sad frog. So speaking of high-low, this is my high-low paint mare, and this is her low foot, and she has these little sad contracted frogs. And so I typically leave a little extra heel on her low foot. One, to help it match the high foot, which I bring down as low as I can, but also to not overweight these little sad frogs. So there is a component of that as well. This is what I was talking about, you know, this horse just happens to have severe high-low, but this is where I'm talking about the rearmost surface of this heel. This heel is so folded under that if we draw this line straight up, it's coming up in front of the cannon bone. And that foot is stood a little bit back, so we do have to keep that in mind. But if we draw a line up from the rearmost surface of the more upright foot, it's a little bit ahead of the cannon bone. So if we could square this horse up, I'm thinking this one would come right up the middle and this would come a little bit more up the front. These are obviously really subjective based on one snapshot photo in time. So I'm kind of always a little bit hesitant to make a trim plan based on that. But again, really thinking about bringing the heel surface back to fix this weight bearing issue so that posturally the horse does not have to compensate is super important. Okay, we're almost done. Bar trimming, like I said, I have been on the, oh my gosh, trim it out till it bleeds, and I have been on the never ever trim it, leave it, it will find a way bandwagon. I've been to both spectrums and I have settled somewhere in the middle. The bar serves a very distinct function in hoof trimming. And so I really find barefoot trimmers, like, I don't mean to pick on them because I was one, I am one, and it's my whole profession, but we get just as rigid as farriers and stuck in this whole, we don't trim bar, we do trim bar, the bar will find its way. Everybody just needs to calm down and find a happy medium, I think, because I just like to go back to the science and anatomically, what is the purpose of the bar? The bar provides structure to the back of the foot, to the frog and digital cushion, and holds the shape of the collateral groove. If we did not have the bar standing up where it's supposed to, supporting that, the whole back of the foot would collapse and be flat, and we would not have collateral grooves. The collateral groove is what gives us the expansion and contraction properties of the hoof. It's that little accordion leaf spring back there, excuse me, that allows all that flexion and movement. So we need the collateral grooves, and we need then the bars to support them. So if we over trim the bars and dig them out completely, we destabilize the back of that hoof capsule, so there's no structure to support that accordion, and everything can kind of extend downward too far. But on the other hand, if we don't trim the bar, if we look at the picture, oops, sorry, I hit my little mouse button. If we look at this picture over here, how this bar is almost level with the hoof wall that the horse is standing on, at peak impact, when everything descends downward, this bar is going to press upward into the digital cushion and into the navicular region and the deep digital flexor tendon and squish it between there and apply too much pressure. So I would really like to see this bar trimmed a little bit more so that there's room for it to descend down on peak impact. This is not enough room because the bar starts kind of right here where it's still flat touching the ground. So I like this bar a lot more, that it's kind of passive, but ultimately this whole foot is going to get trimmed and this bar would need to be trimmed too. So again, I just think there's a happy medium with bar trimming. And here's another picture showing massive bar pressing up into the digital cushion and frog, into our deep digital flexor tendon, through here, into the navicular region of the hoof. So again, these bars need to be lower so that everything can expand downward, but that when they expand down on peak impact, they still make contact and support that accordion at its peak expansion. So that kind of goes back to what I talk about all the time about picturing this hoof in 3D motion, you know, as it's functioning. That leaf spring needs to expand, but it has to bottom out at some point. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. This I thought was just a crazy picture because all of this sole is bar. Like the end of the bar is down here and down here. So if this horse hits the ground and expands downward, it's an extremely exaggerated version of this pressing up into the navicular region. So I don't believe in not trimming the bar. And so that brings me to that girl who was sending me photos of her horse that was lame today after being trimmed. What she showed me was Like the whole wall has been rasped away right down into the sole, probably a little too far. But the most biggest issue I saw is the bars were not touched at all. So if you can imagine going in and rasping all the peripheral load off the hoof, but leaving all those bars sticking up, when you sight down that foot, it's going to be convex as opposed to concave with massive lumps of bar. And so, you know, she's like, oh my gosh, it's over trimmed, it's over trimmed. And I'm like, actually get your knife out and cut off those bars, because that poor horse, they're pressing in. So it's a combination. Like it absolutely could be over trimmed, but we still need to remove all the bar that's a liability in there. So, and that's, I guess, what I mean by when I say middle of the road. This hoof is a beautiful, perfect example of nicely well-maintained bar. It's growing right where it's supposed to. It's upright and trimmed just to be even with the sole. Same idea here. This is my Foxtrotter Tango, and this kind of shows like the before and the after, even though it's two different bars, but it's the same idea, where I just want to make this bar even with the sole so that on peak impact, when everything descends down, it's not pressing upward. If I leave it like this, it's going to apply a little bit too much pressure. It's not bad by any stretch, but I don't want to leave it to apply that. And then this is what happens when bar grows all over the sole and ends up creating subsolar abscessing. I used to see that a lot. I don't see it so much anymore. Although that horse that I was just talking about, if they don't trim that bar, guaranteed it's going to abscess underneath those massive lumps, regardless of all the other errors in the trim, just because it's massive pressure on the solar corium. And that happened to that poor quarter horse. She always had abscesses in her sole because I kept leaving it inflamed and bruising it. And that's all an abscess is a bruise that can't get out. So becomes a little walled off abscess and has to come out that way. And so that was, now hers was not caused by bar, hers was caused by solar inflammation, but it's kind of the same idea because the lumps of bar on the sole cause solar inflammation. It's just a different cause. Okay, and frog trimming, you know.
Wait, sorry.
Oh,
Can I ask you
yeah.
one quick question about bar? I think I'm trimming the bars in the way that you were showing it, where it's just kind of like at the sole plane or below. But what I've found is that I really try not to dig at it, but chunks of it will come off. So I'm assuming that's fine, right? It's shedding itself. If it's like, or if I'll see like a dirt line where I can tell it's kind of getting in with the cracks. So if I just even poke at it a little bit with the knife, it'll kind of chip a chunk out, but it'll put it quite a bit lower than the example you showed of your Foxtrotter. But is that okay?
Yeah, because probably you have more sole than you need. Like,
Oh,
like
which
so
is not what
that
I would have thought about my horse.
yeah, that doesn't mean I'd cut it off, but it
Okay.
just means that the bar is not gonna like exfoliate and fall off too low, like and just fall right out and
Okay.
be gone.
So
So
yeah, I just wanted okay.
right,
Okay.
like I call that falling off with my knife. Like you have to really kind of you have to try a little, but not really, and then it just flicks off and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa. So I know exactly what you mean. And that's the bar is exfoliating and coming off on its own. And probably your sole is just starting to thicken. And so eventually your sole will exfoliate and your sole and your bar will wear at the same level. They're just
Okay.
not in sync yet.
Okay.
But yeah, don't ever panic if a chunk falls off. It is not going to fall off to a point that's detrimental. Okay, so this is a perfect frog. I love it. I probably would have only just cut off the tip here like they did. It looks great. Unless once I trim these heels, it's sticking up, in which case I would maybe lower it a little bit. But all too often, I see people not trim enough, like this photo. I'm not sure whose this was. It was from our group, and I stole the before and after because on my markup, I was like, great start, keep going. And so this is like, obviously, I can't remember whose photo this is, but you did a great start. Like you've taken the bulk of the excess frog off that's sticking up. And plus this is not an easy foot. I can see how out of whack it is in terms of how crooked it is. But what I said in my markup, and I'll say it again now, is I would come in through here where this frog is being pulled and mashed over the collateral groove, and I would open all of that up. Because guaranteed you're going to find disgusting nastiness living in the bottom of that. And there's no way as this horse moves that the flexion and the expansion and contraction of the hoof can expel that. And so that's kind of why I trim a frog. I don't trim a frog to make it look pretty. I trim it to open up those collateral grooves so that as the horse is moving, the dirt plugs will come out, and so that there's no little cracks and crevices for bacteria and gross things to live in. So, excuse me, I would open up this whole side, and I would try to open up this central sulcus crack just a little bit more so that it's not like that nice little dark hole. Okay. That's it for my slideshow. Whew. Where am I at? 6 o'clock? Oh, it's longer than I thought, but that's okay. Does anybody have any more questions about any of that?
That was my fault. It went long. I'm sorry.
It's all good. It doesn't matter. We started early today, so. Okay, so I just wanted to go through all of that. I can't really think of anything else that's super common. Like, I guess what you'll notice is I showed almost no pictures, or I didn't show any pictures of over trimmed anything because it very rarely happens. Like, and it's so circumstantial. Like, if you trim all the wall to a normal height, but don't trim the bar and frog, you have essentially over trimmed the wall because there's too much pressure on the bar and frog. But it's not actually over trimming the wall, it's under trimming. So, it's very subjective. How to know that you aren't going to go too deep trimming the frog? Well, that's a tricky one. And I usually, like, my rule is I want to take as little as possible of the frog, but as much as necessary, which is, I know, not a good answer or an easy one. But somebody posted in the group, I can't remember who, where there was a little flap of frog and they wanted to get in there and trim it, but they were scared. And so they posted the photo and I'm like, yes, get in there and cut it off because it's already detached. Anything detached will not reattach. So if something is lifted, I will very carefully remove it coming up and out of the hoof. So, that's kind of my rule. If it's already detached, it can be trimmed coming up out. If I'm kind of like re-sculpting a frog, like that one in the previous picture that's like way folded over, I'm gonna stay as close to the surface as I can, but go as far down as I have to where it's rotten. And so I don't have a good answer for you. On average, a frog is about, I don't know, 3 to 5/8 of an inch thick, on average, on a healthy foot that's not contracted. And the frog corium follows the exact shape of the external frog in a healthy foot. Let me see if I can find a photo of that while you're here.
Which is wild because if you watch those farrier videos on TikTok and Instagram and all that, like they just get in there with their knife and just like they're cutting off huge chunks of frog. So that's a lot. I mean, I always think they look too small, like they cut off too much anyway, but here it's 5/8 of an inch maybe. And then they're really cutting those chunks off. They're
Yeah.
setting a shoe, but still.
But you also have to remember, if the horse has been in a shoe, that frog has probably been growing down a lot longer than your typical barefoot hoof. I'm talking about a fairly healthy barefoot hoof. Like if I
Okay.
went to my foxtrotter mare and say I could dissect her foot, I could probably cut a 1/2 inch off of her frog before I hit blood supply. But if you look at a horse with a really long frog because they've been peripherally loaded and it's been allowed to overgrow, or like actually even just that one that was overgrown, we could probably cut 1.5 inches off that frog before we got anywhere near those structures. Versus my paint mare with the little sad pathetic frog, I bet you I don't even have 1/4 of an inch before I would hit sensitive frog tissue. So I don't, it's kind of, I do a lot of that by feel and as little as I possibly can. When in doubt, don't trim it, really. But if it's detached, then you can trim it. I do actually think about sometimes like one side of the frog will be lifted and the other side will appear firmly attached. And so I'll think about where the other side is lifted. And if it were lifted on this other side to that same degree, I could trim to that point, if that makes sense, because it's going to be fairly uniform across. Like half of the frog isn't going to be, from in terms of the soft tissue way higher. So, I kind of sometimes compare it to the other side, like at the bottom of that dirt line between the frog and the collateral groove. I'll go by that on one side, and even if I can't see it on the other, I'll just kind of bring that same distance around. But yeah, there's not really an exact answer for that, Morgan. I hope it helps. What does Julie say? Confused about bars. I picture an overgrown bar. Oh wait, I was going to show you this photo before I go on, Julie. Just one sec. Let me share this again. Can you see that photo? So there we go. What I like to look at in this is like, see how this is the live frog, which we call the digital cushion. The live frog is really a paper thin coating on the digital cushion. And this looks exactly like a frog. Like when I pull the sole and the frog off, this is what's sitting there. This is our bar lamina for reference. And these are our solar corium tubules, and our coronary band tubules come up through here. Like you can see how this looks exactly like a frog. And so you can get away with trimming a little bit deeper in the central sulcus than the sides of the frog, because anatomically there's a deeper hole in the center, if that makes sense. So that, you know, I'm always just a little careful. If I have to go excavating in the central sulcus to open it up or get something nasty, I try to limit it to the central sulcus and not just come out the side, because I know that that raises up. And I think a piece of it is just oodles and oodles of dissections and just becoming familiar with what that looks like. Okay. Okay, Brienne's got to head out. That's okay. Thanks for joining us and all the questions. That's awesome. Gives me someone to talk to. Okay, back to Julie's question. Confused about bars. I picture an overgrown bar as like a ridge along the groove. I'm not sure how to determine what is bar that is laid over and what is sole. Yeah, you know what? It doesn't have to be that confusing, truly. I know that it's hard, and like I used to get really hung up on, is it bar or is it sole so I can trim it. Now what I think about is it uniform? Like I don't care if it's bar or sole. If I can find the sole at the apex of the frog and whatever degree of concavity that horse has in that particular hoof, and I can follow that concavity all the way back to the heel, whatever is in the way of that concavity that's lumpy or bumpy, I trim off. And that could be bar, it could be sole, it could be both. To me, it doesn't really matter. It's more about evening out that concavity all the way around. And I guess this is where I used to get upset when I would see the farriers take their knife and carve in all that concavity. But yet here I am doing it. But it's different. I'm not carving out the whole sole to create steeper concavity. I'm finding the natural concavity of that sole in that moment and bringing it all the way back. So it doesn't really matter if it's sole or bar. It just needs to be smooth. Does that make a little bit of sense, Julie? I hope.
Yes, it does. That's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any more questions? Anything you want to go over for the week? Yeah, just unmute yourself and ask away. Did you find the unmute button?
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, this, like I said, it's a learning curve to figure this out. Yeah, bar pools. I've been read a lot about them, and I know my horses had something that was, you could consider that at one time, and there were these big lumps that the farrier was leaving. Well, I just wondered what your thoughts were on. They say if they're there for a reason. Is it just junk or okay?
Well,
I'm quiet now.
I think it's just junk. So
Okay, yeah.
I think it depends. The bar is there for a reason. The bar holds the structure of those collateral grooves and creates that leaf spring in the back of the foot. So it's important. But when it is allowed to grow in excess up and over the sole and creates those pools, it can actually undermine the integrity of the sole and grow into it and cause abscessing and thin soles and all kinds of problems. So in those instances, it's a problem and I want to trim it, versus
Okay.
like the bar itself has a purpose, but we just need to be more
Mhm.
specific in our wording, like overgrown pooling bar needs to be trimmed. Healthy bar that's vertical in its proper position and it's not sticking up past the sole, then that wouldn't need to be trimmed. So
Mhm.
it can't be so generic that we never trim bar, it has a purpose, or we always
Right.
trim bar. It depends on the bar.
Mhm. Yeah, mine had some really bad. That's why I finally had to just gently get rid of these other people because it was horrific. I've got pictures of it. It was just really bad. They were leaving on in their feet, and so and when you find bruising underneath, you know there's a problem there.
Yes. And on that note, when I find bruising under a bar in the sole, it usually causes me to trim deeper, which is probably counterproductive to what most of you would do. If you took off a chunk and saw red, you'd probably panic and back off. When I take off a chunk and I see red, I go, oh, there's been way too much excess pressure there. I want to make sure that I hollow that out so there's not excess pressure there anymore.
Yeah, and I'm still finding like when you find the little black cracks, like where the bars have laid over, and I'm still finding those. And which right now I just finished scrubbing one of my horse's feet, and he's all cleaned up, really good to take photos. But now that they're softened, I need to go out there and at least start working on the bar. You know, I sometimes I can only get a little bit accomplished at a time, but so that's I'm aiming for after this.
Yeah, and that's the best time when they're softer, right? Because it's hard for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And I look at like I was saying earlier, sometimes when you have a lot of overgrown bar, I don't always cut it all off in one go because if it's been overgrown and pooling there for a long time or embedding there for a long time, it can have created a thinness to the sole underneath. And so I will take off, as much as I can to the level of the sole, but sometimes you'll see the little tubules all going the wrong way, like spaghetti in a pot where all the other tubules are proper, but there's this little weird embedded mashed in thing there. And that's a true bar pool. And like I was saying earlier, I used to follow a different trimming style where we'd go right in there and carve that out, regardless of how deep it went. I now find I prefer to just take it to the sole level, let the horse grow and push it up a little more, take it to the sole level, let it grow. And I just keep going back. Like in my online course, I talk about a 2x4 on the grass, how it will squish the grass underneath. But if you came in every day and sanded a little bit off, eventually that 2x4 would be thin enough that the grass could lift it up and grow again. And I kind of think of the sole tubules under those bar pools just like that I just want to thin it carefully over time so that it can eventually lift up and be free. Right. We've covered a lot, so I'm going to post this in the group if anybody wants to rewatch it or watch the slideshow, or for those who couldn't join us can watch it later. Before we go, any last questions?
Where do we find about your online trimming course? The information about that.
That is on my website. I will post a link when I post this
Okay.
video in the group.
Okay. Yeah, because I looked for it and I just wasn't finding how to, you know, get more information about it. Or
Sure.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no
Okay,
problem.
thank you.
No problem. I'll post a link for you in the group.
Okay.
All right. Okay, well, thank you all for joining me. This was awesome as usual. And in the next, probably later tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to get the guide for May going. We'll get this posted. And I want to get a poll going for what June's topic is going to be. And we'll go from there. All right, everybody have a good night.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, everybody. Bye.